There are stories I have kept for years, tucked close to the chest the way you carry something fragile, not because you fear breaking it, but because you know it is the kind of thing that matters, and matters deserves to be handled with care. This is one of those stories. Pull your chair a little closer to the fire, dear friends, and let me tell you about Miss Vivienne Calder, and the autumn she arrived at the wrong house, for entirely the wrong reasons, and found, without looking for it, without expecting it, without having any room in her careful plans for it at all, the truest thing she had ever been offered. Yorkshire, October 1816. The moors in October have a particular quality of light that does something to a person's sense of proportion. Everything feels simultaneously vast and intimate, as though the sky has leaned down to have a closer look at you. Vivienne Calder had noticed this from the carriage window on the road from Harrogate, and had found it in the way she found most things that were objectively beautiful, both stirring and slightly inconvenient. She was not in a condition to be stirred. She needed to be composed. Her father had put it to her plainly, which was the only way Gerald Calder ever put anything. He was a solicitor from Edinburgh, a man who had built his practice and his reputation on the careful management of other people's complications, and who believed with some justification that clarity, applied consistently, resolved more difficulties than sentiment ever had. Lord Frederick Forsyth, he had said, is 29 years old, well regarded by those who know him, and in possession of a good understanding. The families have spoken, the visit is arranged, go and see what you think of him. He had not said, I hope you will be happy. He had not needed to. That was the thing about Gerald Calder. He didn't fill the air with reassurances he couldn't guarantee. He simply looked at his daughter across the breakfast table, with the expression of a man who trusts the person he raised, and that trust was worth more to Vivienne than any number of careful words. What she thought of Lord Frederick Forsyth, within the first 48 hours of her arrival at Thornfield Hall, was that he was precisely the kind of man who would be very easy to like and very difficult to love. He was handsome in the uncomplicated way of men who have always been handsome and have consequently never had to develop a compensating quality. He was attentive when he remembered to be attentive. He laughed easily, including, twice, at things that were not quite funny, not a fault exactly, but a thing she noticed. His warmth was genuine but diffuse, spreading itself evenly across every person in the room with the comfortable indiscrimination of firelight, which felt like particular warmth until you stepped back and observed that everyone was equally warm, and the feeling was not yours after all. By the third day she had also noticed where his warmth was not diffuse. Miss Rosalind Wexford was the daughter of a neighbouring family, a quiet girl with steady eyes and an uncommonly sensible way of speaking, who appeared at Thornfield Hall with a frequency that suggested she had long since stopped requiring a formal invitation. She was not beautiful in the obvious manner. She was the kind of woman whose face became more interesting the longer you looked at it. And Lord Frederick Forsyth, Vivienne observed, had been looking at it for what appeared to be some considerable time. She was not angry. That is the first thing I want you to understand about Vivienne Calder. She had a gift for precise emotional accounting, and she applied it honestly to herself. She was not in love with Lord Frederick, had not had sufficient acquaintance with him to be so, and therefore was not suffering the injury of a betrayed heart. What she felt was something more complicated and rather more uncomfortable. A profound and inconvenient sympathy for two people who clearly belonged together and had been arranged away from each other by families who had assessed their options shrewdly and their children imprecisely. And then there was the other brother. Adrian Forsyth, Viscount of Halcroft, was 37 years old and had been widowed 18 months prior, which the county families mentioned in the particular tone one uses to convey information that is simultaneously factual and cautionary. He was present at Thornfield Hall, the way a significant piece of architecture is present. You were always aware of him, without being able to say exactly when you had become so. He said very little. Not the little of absence or inattention, but the specific little of them who listened to everything in the room with a quality of concentrated observation that most people mistook for coldness, because they had never been on the receiving end of genuine attention and could not recognize it when they encountered it. Vivienne recognized it. She had grown up with a father who listened the same way. She found her occupation, as she always found her occupation when she needed to think, in the physical reality of the place around her. Thornfield Hall's east wing had a problem. She had noticed it on her second morning. During a walk around the grounds, a section of exterior stonework along the east parapet that showed the particular pattern of water infiltration she had come to recognize from years of accompanying her father to estate dispute hearings, where the condition of a property's structural fabric was often the hinge on which a case turned. She had read more about masonry and drainage in solicitors' offices and estate ledgers than most young women of her acquaintance had read about anything, and what she read now, in the dark staining along the mortar lines and the slight outward lean of the upper course, was the early signature of a serious and progressing fault. She went to look at it more carefully. Then she went back and looked again. She made notes in the small journal she carried everywhere, the one her father had given her for recording observations worth keeping, because Gerald Calder had always told her that an observation unrecorded was merely a feeling, and feelings, however accurate, were not admissible. It was in the east wing on the fourth afternoon that the Viscount of Halcroft found her. She was standing in the disused corridor on the upper level of the wing, looking at the interior wall below the compromised parapet. And she did not hear him approach, because she was occupied with the precise angle of a water stain that told her the damage was further advanced than it appeared from outside. She turned and found him standing in the doorway. He looked at her, she looked at him, neither spoke for a moment. "The parapet," she said, because she was not in the habit of performing ignorance about things she knew. "The exterior mortar joints on the east face are failing. The water is finding its way under the coping stones." She gestured at the stain. "That pattern suggests it has been happening for at least 2 seasons. The Viscount looked at the wall. Then he looked at her. "Yes," he said, "I know. Has a mason assessed it?" "Last spring. The estimate was," he paused, the pause of a man deciding how precisely to answer, "considerable. It will be more considerable if it is left another season. The lintel above the third window is beginning to show stress fractures. If moisture reaches the cavity during a hard frost—" She stopped, aware that she was lecturing a man about his own house, in a tone her mother had occasionally described as forthright. "I apologize, it is not my place to." "No," he said, "continue." She continued. He listened with the same quality of attention she had noticed across the dinner table. Complete, unperformed, the attention of a man who had decided that what she was saying was worth hearing and had no interest in pretending otherwise. When she finished, he said nothing for a moment. Then, "How do you know this?" She told him about her father's practice, about the estate dispute hearings, about the ledgers and surveys, and 12 years of following Gerald Calder into rooms where things that mattered were being decided, and understanding, slowly, that the things that mattered were most often physical and financial and needed to be looked at directly. He listened, and when she finished, he looked at her differently, with a quality of careful recalibration that she was honest enough to note she found more satisfying than anything Lord Frederick had said to her in 4 days. "May I see your notes?" he said. She hesitated, then handed him the journal, open to the relevant pages. He read with the focused precision of a man accustomed to documents, turning the pages carefully, and handed it back. "You are correct about the lintel," he said. "I had not seen that." She was not sure what to say. He saved her the difficulty by nodding once, the nod of 2 people who have exchanged something real and are both aware of it, and left. She thought about that exchange for the remainder of the day. "Now, dear friends, I must tell you about the evening of the 7th day, because it is the evening that matters and, I want you to have the full picture of it. Lady Marguerite Forsyth, the Dowager Viscountess, was a woman of formidable social architecture, built over 40 years of managing a significant Yorkshire household into a surface of great polish and impenetrability, which she deployed with the efficiency of someone who had long since stopped distinguishing between the surface and what lay beneath it. She had arranged Lord Frederick's consideration of Vivienne Calder with the same methodical pragmatism with which she arranged everything, and if she had noticed what Vivienne had noticed about her younger son and Miss Wexford, she had chosen not to look at it directly. The dinner on the 7th evening was a county affair. The Pendletons, the Haverstock family, old Colonel Fairbra and his wife, the Wexfords, 20 people at a long table in a room lit by too many candles, which gave everything the quality of a scene being performed for an audience. Sir Barnaby Haverstock was a man of considerable local standing and considerable local certainty about the proper order of things. He sat 3 places from Vivienne, and had been making a study of her throughout the fish course. She was aware of it the way women who have been assessed across dinner tables for most of their adult lives are aware of it. Without looking, without acknowledging, with the particular internal stillness of a person who has learned to wait out the assessment without rewarding it with attention. He addressed his remark to the man on his left, at the volume that is not quite public and not quite private, the volume designed to be overheard by its precise intended audience. He said something about the Edinburgh connection and the legal profession and what a family of that sort could reasonably expect from an association with a house like Thornfield. And he said it with the comfortable certainty of a man who has never had to question whether his own family warranted scrutiny. Vivienne looked at her plate. She had been looking at plates in response to remarks of this kind for a significant portion of her 27 years. She was good at it. A composure built by long practice from materials that included her father's steadiness and her own refusal to allow other people's smallness to become her emergency. The Viscount of Halcroft set down his wine-glass. It was a small sound. The particular kind of small sound a room notices because of what it precedes, the way a silence before thunder is different from any other silence. "You are finished, Haverstock," he said. 4 words. Not a rebuke constructed for effect, not a performance. Simply the quiet finality of a man who had been paying attention and had decided a thing had reached its limit, stated in the tone of someone who does not require the room's agreement and is not going to wait for it. The room went still. Sir Barnaby's expression did several things in rapid succession. The Pendleton daughters looked at each other. Mrs. Fairbra developed a sudden intense interest in her soup. Lady Argymargy, at the head of the table, looked at her elder son with an expression that contained Vivienne thought. An entire conversation's worth of things that had not been said aloud. Vivienne looked at the candles. She did not look at the Viscount. She did not trust herself to look at him with the expression she had available, which was not the composed and appropriately grateful expression of a guest who has been defended by her host, but something considerably more unguarded. The specific quality of being seen, not rescued, not managed, not patronized, but seen by a person who had apparently decided something about her worth before she had given him any occasion to, and had acted on it as a matter of simple, unperformed fact. She looked at the candles and held herself carefully together, and was, beneath all of it, shaken in a way that had nothing to do with Sir Barnaby Haverstock. The morning after the dinner, Vivienne rose early, took her journal, and went to the East Wing. She was not hiding. She was thinking. The East Wing was where she went to think, which had become, in 7 days, a habit she had not noticed herself forming. She thought about Lord Frederick and Miss Wexford, and the triangular unhappiness of 3 people aimed in mismatched directions by families who had been practical without being perceptive. She thought about what she would tell her father. She thought about a wine-glass being set down on a table in a room full of people. Lord Frederick came to find her at 9:30. 9 with the expression of a man who had spent the night determining to do something difficult and was not entirely certain the determination would hold. "Miss Calder," he said. "Lord Frederick," she said. He was quiet a moment, looking at the compromised parapet with the unfocused gaze of a man not seeing what he was looking at. Then, "I owe you an apology." "Yes," she said. He had perhaps anticipated more. She waited. "I have not been," he stopped, began again. "There is something I should tell you." "I know about Miss Wexford," she said. The silence that followed was the silence of a man discovering that the thing he had been preparing to confess was not in fact a secret. "You knew," he said. "I observed," she said. "There is a difference." She closed her journal. "Lord Frederick, I am going to ask you a direct question, and I would like a direct answer." She looked at him steadily without unkindness. "Do you wish to marry me?" He looked at the parapet. He looked at his hands. Finally, he looked at her, with the expression of a man being offered honest ground to stand on after a long time on uncertain footing. "No," he said, quietly, honestly, with the particular relief of someone putting down a weight they had been carrying for someone else. "Thank you," she said. He blinked. "That is, you are remarkably calm." "I have had 6 days to arrive at this conversation," she said. "You have had one night." She paused. "You should speak to your mother, and to Miss Wexford. Whatever comes next, she deserves to know where she stands." He left. Vivienne remained in the east wing with her journal, and the October light coming pale through the windows and the cracked lintel above the third pane, and thought about what it meant that the arrangement was dissolving, and what her father would say, and whether she had expected this from the beginning, and Spies simply required the time to confirm it. She thought about a wine-glass. She thought about 4 words. She was still thinking when she heard boots on the flagstone behind her. The Viscount of Halcroft stopped when he saw her. She stopped in the process of turning. They looked at each other across the length of the corridor. "Sit down if you like," he said. "You do not have to say anything." She sat down on the stone bench below the window. He leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, and looked at the compromised parapet with the same concentrated attention he gave everything. They were quiet for a considerable time. She was aware of him in a manner she had not been aware of anyone in recent memory. Not his appearance, not his title, not the fact that his intervention at dinner had rearranged something in her chest she was still in the process of cataloguing. Simply him, the specific quality of his presence, which was their quality that had made the East Wing feel less solitary than it should have, and which she understood. Sitting there with the October wind against the glass, she had been orienting herself toward for the entirety of the week without once admitting it. "Your brother spoke to me this morning," she said eventually. "I know," the Viscount said. "He will speak to your mother." "Yes." A single syllable that carried an entire complicated calculation about a parent who is not easily redirected, delivered by someone who had been redirecting her for 37 years and was moderately experienced at it. Vivienne looked at the lintel above the third window. "The mason your mother called in the spring," she said. "Do you still have the survey?" He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not a smile, but the quality of a man surprised in a direction he found precisely appropriate. "In the estate records," he said. "Why?" "Because his assessment of the parapet damage is almost certainly correct, but his proposed solution is wrong," she said. "You do not need to replace the coping stones entirely. You need to repoint the mortar joints in sections and install new lead flashing along the base of the parapet wall. It will cost about 1/3 of his estimate, and it will last longer." He was quiet a moment. "How do you know that?" "There was a case in my father's practice 7 years ago. An estate near Stirling with an identical profile of damage. The owner spent the larger sum on full replacement. Within 4 years the infiltration had resumed because the underlying flashing had not been addressed. My father kept the survey." She paused. "I read it." "Of course you did," the Viscount said. Something in the way he said it stopped her. It was not dismissal, not condescension. It was the tone of a man who had been fitting pieces of a picture together for 7 days and had just placed the last one. "Of course," she said. He looked at her directly. His eyes were dark, not the fashionable grey of romantic fiction, but the genuine dark brown of a man looking at you and not at the idea of you. "You arrived at Thornfield Hall and within 3 days had identified a structural problem my estate manager has been recording as minor concern in the quarterly ledger for 2 years, he said. "You did this because you looked properly, without being asked." He paused. "Yes, of course." Vivienne held his gaze, not entirely certain what her expression was doing, and not certain she would have managed it differently if she had known. "I should go and dress for dinner," she said. "Yes," he said. She rose, gathered her journal, and stopped at the door, because there was something she had been wanting to say and had not yet found the form for, and the form had arrived. "Yesterday at dinner," she said. "What you said to Sir Barnaby Haverstock." He waited. "I want you to know I understood it for what it was, not a performance of hospitality, not the management of a social situation." She paused. "The truth." He held her gaze a long moment. "It was," he said. She went. "If you will permit me a moment, dear friends, and I think you will, because I believe you have gathered by now that this is not the sort of story that ends at dinner. I want to tell you that Adrian Forsyth, Viscount of Halcroft, sat in the East Wing corridor for some time after Miss Vivienne Calder left it. He sat with the October light, going orange through the cracked pane, and thought about a woman who read masonry surveys for interest, and wrote observations in a small journal, and had looked at his inheritance and seen what 18 months of his own careful attention had failed to catch, and the unmistakable air of a woman. He thought about a woman who had been arranged toward his brother without complaint, and had dissolved the arrangement with the directness of someone who considers honesty the most basic courtesy available. He thought about what it meant to have been watching a person for 7 days and to have arrived, with the clarity that was his particular habit of mind, at a certainty he had not expected to arrive at again. If you enjoy stories like this one, stories about people who look carefully and love precisely, I hope you will subscribe to Moonlight at Bellwood and stay with me by this fire for the ones still to come. Lady Marguerite came to Vivienne's room that evening. She came not with the efficient armor of a woman defending a collapsed arrangement, but with the measured bearing of someone who had reconsidered a situation and chosen honesty over position. She was, Vivienne thought, significantly more interesting than the surface she had been presenting across dinner tables for a week. Sharp-intended, direct, slightly dry, the kind of person Vivienne understood immediately once the polish came down. "I want to apologize," Lady Marguerite said, "for Frederick, and for the arrangement which I made with insufficient attention to the people I was arranging." "Frederick apologized himself this morning," Vivienne said, "and Miss Wexford seems a woman of genuine quality. I am not sorry for her, if that is what you are wondering." Lady Marguerite was quiet a moment. "My elder son told me some months ago that the arrangement for Frederick was not what I had decided it was. He said it once. I did not attend to it." "Does he say things only once?" Vivienne asked. "Always," Lady Marguerite said. "It is his character. He states a thing clearly, and if it is not heard, he does not repeat it. He considers repetition a form of pleading, and he will not plead." A pause. "I have spent 30 years deciding after the fact that he was right." Vivienne sat with that. She thought about a man who spoke precisely because every word was considered, dismissed as cold by people accustomed to warmth that cost nothing. She thought about what it must be to say the true thing once, quietly, and be looked through. "I know something about being misread," she thought. Gerald Calder arrived on a Wednesday, 3 days after the arrangement had formally been acknowledged as dissolved. He came directly from Edinburgh in his travelling coat, moving through the entrance hall with the calm efficiency of a man who had received a letter assessed its contents, and acted. He embraced his daughter in the hall in the way that contained everything. The worry unspoken in the letter, the relief at seeing her intact, the love Gerald Calder had never once failed to make evident even without words for it. "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it, Lord Frederick and Miss Wexford, the dinner and the 4 words, the East Wing, the journal and the masonry survey, and 2 conversations in a corridor with a man who listened the way her father listened. She did not at first tell him about the particular quality of being looked at by Adrian Forsyth in the moment he had said, of course, as though her capacity for careful observation was not a curiosity but the most natural thing in the world. When she finished, her father was quiet in the way he was quiet when integrating information. Then, "You are all right." It was not a question. "I am clarified," she said. He looked at her with the expression she loved best on his face. A man surprised by his own daughter, in a direction he approved of entirely. "Vivienne," he said, "before I speak to Lady Forsyth about the dissolution—" "The Viscount has asked to speak with you," she said. Her father was very still. "The Viscount? What does the Viscount wish to speak to me about?" She met her father's eyes with the direct gaze of a woman who had spent 7 days in a house noticing things, and had arrived, via an East Wing corridor and a wineglass and a survey of failed mortar joints, at a certainty she had not gone looking for. "I think you should hear it from him," she said. She did not hear what passed between Adrian Forsyth and her father in the estate study. She was in the East Wing, naturally, with her journal and the particular October afternoon light, knowing that something was happening 2 corridors away, that was either the beginning of something or the end of something, and that she had given it all she could give, and the rest was not hers to manage. She read her notes. She added to them. Outside the cracked 3rd window, the moors went grey and gold in the fading light, and Vivienne Calder sat with the particular stillness of a woman who had decided to trust the situation and was finding it, for once, not as difficult as she expected. The door opened at 4:30. Adrian Forsyth did not go to the far wall this time. He came to the bench where she was sitting, looked at the window a moment, then at her. "Your father asked me 5 questions," he said. "Only 4 the last time," she said, before she had decided to say it. Something happened in his expression. "He began with the structural survey," he said. "He wanted to know how I had allowed the East Wing to reach its current state and what I intended to do about it. He asked you about the masonry. He said his daughter had written him a very detailed letter about a lintel," the Viscount said, "and he wanted to know if I was the kind of man who listened when someone told him something important about his own property." She became aware that she was doing something with her face that was not entirely composed, and made no effort to correct it. "What did you tell him?" "That I had not been for the 18 months prior, and that I intended to be going forward." A pause. He seemed to consider that acceptable. "And the other 4 questions?" He looked at her. The dark eyes that were not fashionable but genuine, the eyes of a man looking directly at the things he was looking at. "Whether my intentions were honorable," he said. "Whether I understood the practical realities, the social comment, the adjustments a match of this kind would require of both of us. Whether I had arrived at my conclusion by considered judgment, rather than the impulse of a difficult week." He paused. "And whether I was the kind of man who would value his daughter correctly, not only in the first year, but in all the years after." "What did you answer?" "Yes," he said, "to all 5, including the masonry." Vivienne looked at her journal. She looked at the cracked lintel. She looked at Adrian Forsyth, Viscount of Halcroft, who had said 4 words across a dinner table without requiring credit for it, who had sat beside her in a cold corridor, asking for nothing but her continued presence, who had told her father the truth, in precisely the form the truth required, and then come to find her in the East Wing, because he knew, as she knew, that this was where the real conversations happened. She thought about what it meant to be seen correctly. not instructed, not improved towards someone else's standard, not assessed against the expectations of a family she had not chosen, but seen as what she was, a solicitor's daughter with a small journal and a particular habit of looking carefully at things, and found not merely adequate, but she could see it in the way he was looking at her, precisely right. "I have conditions," she said. He did not quite smile, but the quality of his expression was that of a man surprised in a direction he found entirely fitting. "I expected nothing less," he said. "You say things once," she said. "I understand why. But I need to know you will say them, and not assume I have heard them simply because they were said in my vicinity." "Agreed. And the east wing needs a mason before the first frost. A different mason, with a brief that specifies repointing and flashing rather than full replacement of the coping. I have the specifications in my journal, and I will write them out clearly." He looked at her with the expression she would come to know, as the one that meant he was entirely, specifically, without performance of any kind, satisfied. "I would like that very much," he said. "After," she said. "After. After you say the thing I think you came in here to say." He was quiet a moment. Then, without preamble, without the architecture of a formal declaration, without any of the managed distance a man of his position might have constructed between himself and the moment, he said, "I love you. I have known it since the morning I found you in this corridor arguing with a water stain as though it had personally offended you, and I have not said it because I have been waiting for the right moment, and I have concluded that the right moment in this east wing does not exist." "It does not," she agreed. "This wing rewards directness." "Yes," he said, "so I have noticed." She looked at him. He looked at her. Between them, the October light and the cracked lintel, and the small notebook open to the page that had started all of this. "Yes," she said. "The answer to what you were going to ask is yes." He sat down on the bench beside her. Not at a formal distance, but the way a man sits when he has been, in some essential respect, beside someone for a week and has only just been permitted to acknowledge it. She showed him the masonry specifications. He read them with the full attention he gave everything, and when he was done he said she was correct about the flashing, and that he did not know how she had seen it when 3 separate estate managers had not. "I looked," she said. "Yes," he said, "that is entirely the thing about you." The county families talked, as county families reliably do, about the Calder connection, the dissolved arrangement, and what it meant for the Forsyth family that the Viscount had, with the unapologetic efficiency that was his whole character, decided to marry the Edinburgh solicitor's daughter before anyone had arranged him to do so. Lord Frederick married Miss Rosalind Wexford in November, a ceremony small and evidently joyful, the joy entirely genuine and visible even from the back of the church. Vivienne watched him during the breakfast, and thought this was the best version of Lord Frederick she had seen, and was glad of it without reservation. Gerald Calder stayed at Thornfield Hall for the engagement announcement. He sat across from Lady Marguerite at dinner, and found in her the precise species of direct, practical excellence he respected, above almost everything, and they had a conversation that began with the dissolution of the original arrangement, and moved, by degrees no one else at the table entirely tracked into inheritance law as it pertained to entailed Yorkshire estates, then into crop rotation on the north-facing home fields, and then— this was the part Vivienne noticed from across the table— into the kind of conversation that has no subject at all, just 2 people who find each other's company genuinely interesting and are not bothering to conceal it. She mentioned this to Adrian on the way home in the carriage, in the dark, after the announcement dinner, the Yorkshire moors moving past black outside the window. He was quiet a moment. "Your father is a remarkable man." "He is. He told me when I called on him that he had known what kind of man I was from the masonry letter. He said anyone who could inspire his daughter to write 4 pages about a parapet and a drainage problem in the middle of an otherwise complicated situation was paying the right kind of attention. A pause. He also said the specifications in your journal were correct and that I should implement them before December. He read my journal. He raised you, Adrian said. He was not going to take my word for it. She looked at him. The carriage lamps made shadows on his face, and she thought about a man who had been saying precise things into rooms that were not listening for 37 years, and had arrived here, in this carriage, in this October dark, at a woman who intended to listen carefully to everything he said, and to say what she meant in return, and to find in that the particular solidity of a life genuinely shared rather than politely managed. You should have said it sooner, she said. In the East Wing, earlier than you did. I know. Why didn't you? He was quiet for the length of a field going by in the dark. Because I say things once, he said, and I wanted to be certain before I said this particular thing that once would be enough. She held his hand in the dark of the carriage. He held it back with the quiet sureness of a man who had been, in some essential and unmistakable way, looking for this, and had found it, and did not intend to be imprecise about keeping it. They married in January in the chapel at Thornfield Hall, in the way of two people who do not require an occasion to confirm what had been true since October. Gerald Calder and Lady Marguerite Forsyth stood together during the ceremony, conducting a low-voiced exchange about drainage on the north-facing home fields, which was entirely characteristic of both of them, and satisfied Vivienne more than she could have accounted for. The mason came in November with the revised brief. The east wing parapet was repointed, the flashing installed, the lintel stabilized, the cost considerably less than the original estimate. Adrian's estate manager, to his credit, recorded the revised figures in the quarterly ledger with the notation, assessment provided by the Viscountess-elect. The Viscountess-elect read that notation and said nothing, but Adrian saw her expression and filed it carefully alongside all the other things he was learning to read about the woman he had married, his preferred activity in the first months, and, as it turned out, in all the months after. Sir Barnaby Haverstock was not invited to any dinner at Thornfield Hall that winter. It was not a punishment and not a performance. It was simply a decision Adrian Forsyth made once, quietly, and did not revisit. At the wedding breakfast, Gerald Calder made a toast. It was brief, which was his nature, and direct, which was also his nature, and it said in 3 sentences what another man might have said in 20. He said he had sent his daughter to Yorkshire to consider a particular arrangement, and that the arrangement had resolved itself the way arrangements sometimes do when the people involved are paying proper attention. He said he was grateful, in the specific and unhyperbolic way of a man who means exactly what he says, for a son-in-law who had looked at his daughter and seen what was actually there. And he said that in his experience, which was considerable, the truest matches were never the arranged ones. They were the ones that arrived when nobody was looking. Lady Marguerite, seated beside him, said nothing, but the expression on her face, directed briefly at her elder sons across the table, was the expression of a woman approximately 30 years late to understanding something, who had decided at last simply to be glad of it. This is the story, dear friends, that I carry close to the chest. Not because it is unusual, arrangements have been dissolving since arrangements began, but because of what it says about the particular and undervalued quality of looking carefully at things. Vivienne Calder looked at a parapet and saw what 3 managers had recorded as minor. She looked at an empty chair and saw an unhappiness that needed to be named. She looked at a man the county called cold and saw someone paying more attention to everything than anyone else in the room, who had simply concluded that most things did not yet warrant a response. And Adrian Forsyth, who had spent 37 years being misread by people who could not distinguish between silence and absence, between precision and coldness, between a man who says things once because he means them, and a man who says nothing at all. Adrian Forsyth looked at a woman arguing with a water stain in a disused corridor and recognized, with the clarity that was his whole character, someone who looked at the world the same way he did and found it equally full of things worth attending to. She came to Thornfield for the wrong man, she found the right life. Not despite the East Wing and the masonry and the 4 words at a county dinner table because of them. Because the person who defends you without requiring your gratitude and sits beside you in a cold corridor without requiring your performance and reads your notes about a parapet with the same attention they would give a treaty is the rarest and most particular kind. And when you find them, you do not let the county's opinion of how it happened determine what you do about it. Subscribe to Moonlight at Bellwood and come back to the fire. The next story is already waiting, and the night is long, and we have all the time in the world.